Hello, everyone. Hey, fellas, how's it going? As you can see from, I can imagine what I'm gonna put up as a title. I have some stuff on my mind. Toxicity, nowadays, and there's no doubt that it has a negative instance, negative connotation. We think about toxic in terms of poison, though poison and, something being toxic is not necessarily the same. In the same way, um, venom and poison is not necessarily the same. They have different ways that they affect um, the flesh or the nervous system, but that's something else. Toxicity in terms of society, how they say so and so is toxic, or that's toxic behavior, or that's a toxic relationship. That's more what I want to address, or give my thoughts on. You can, I guess, tell yourself, how can you defend toxicity? So I guess like that's a terrible thing. Have you ever been in a toxic relationship? Or have you ever had someone be toxic towards you? Well, of course. I mean, I'm a human being. I've been on this planet for a while. I've seen things in front of me play out over time in front of me. Absolutely. I've either been in such relationships or had someone be that way towards me, and I wouldn't be surprised if I was that way towards someone, because it doesn't mean that I'm immune to it. I could have been that way towards someone and not even realize it. Where I'm going with this is sometimes, and here I'm speaking specifically for myself, toxicity used as a tool, sometimes used as a, I guess you could say, reactionary response. You know, uh, there are lots of songs out there you could, and this even happened to me, uh, crazily enough. I was watching old cartoons and I went, just so happened to land on one of these old songs called Toxic Love from the movie Fern Gully, I believe. Something like that. It got me thinking about stuff I, dealt with in the past and what people might see or perceive as being very toxic between, I guess you could say, friends of mine, or even very strong relationships that are have been long lasting friendships and even relationships, I guess. From the outside, it was very toxic, but it just happened to for me. Those particular friendships, they still exist today. Some of these relationships, in terms of particularly friendships, not necessarily romantic partnership, it's been 15 years, 20 years. Can't say specifically because it's hard to think about what I want to say. 2 3 minutes from now, while simultaneously thinking about you know all my friends and stuff that I've been through with them. But this idea of toxicity and like either gaslighting, violence, uh, coercion, subterfuge, all types of ways and do's and don'ts of how you behave with people. The thing is, sometimes, and this goes especially when between two people that are very, I guess you could say, in terms strong in terms they're hard-headed or they're steadfast or they take a long time to process information because they have to compare it to what they've known their whole lives or to the sequences of ideas that they've held to. It's this kind of thing that at least maybe is just the way I see it. I would much rather convince someone of something through, being very difficult to do so or taking a lot of time, because if you don't, then you know that, hey, you convince someone something and you might be wrong, but because it's easy to sway, they agree with you and then you don't get anywhere. In the same way, you could easily convince someone of something. The next person after you can convince them otherwise just as easy. But when it takes a long time and you debate over it and you have long conversations and you have the dialogue and discourse, that is, I can imagine, I don't see how else anybody could say that that's not the better way to go, but perhaps such a thing exists. Back to toxicity though. As an individual, and as I've had friends or other individuals that I have grown friendships with, as you may have probably figured by now, thinking about how you'd be friends with a toxic person, or that you, as mutual friends, engage in somehow, this mutually destructive or, weirdly enough, mutually constructive toxic relationship with one another, right? Is that, I guess you could say, so wrong? Sometimes, for me, I would say that I was more or less coerced, or tricked, or pressured into believing in something or seeing something, and I would have to admit that I would not have been able to see it or experience it otherwise. It's kind of like this weird thing where some people, the way that they teach their children or their friends or whatever you want to call it, to swim, is that they toss them into a pool. Say, hey, if you want to live, you better get out. Is that the best way to go about it? No, but it worked for some people. In the same way, some people, when they learn how to, you, you know, operate a vehicle. For me, it was motorcycles. It was pretty much, hey, here's your controls, go for it. You screw up, you fall, you're gonna get hurt. And I had to take my own time and teach myself. Is that the right way of doing it? Absolutely not. But it gave me a basis by which I did not fear my own experience. And as of now, I've spent, wow, been writing for years since I was, what, 12? The number of accidents um, I've gone through have been way less. When I say accidents, I don't mean like street accidents. I mean accidents while on fields or tracks and stuff like that. Actual accidents on the road, I rode for 2 years almost daily. Never had an accident, never put the bike down because I knew, and I was easily, taught. So it may not mean much for a lot of you, but trading from mini bikes or pocket bikes, motocross, into street bikes, or bobbers or whatever. It's a whole transition. The way that you ride and the way that you have to think and how far ahead you have to look and all that. Well, it's a whole bunch of other stuff that is different from the topic. Don't want to go on a tangent. How can I defend toxicity? Well, I have had this conversation with one of my particular friends, wherein I say stuff like, the way that certain individuals behave is a lot more through pressure and hardship and distress than actual, like, not being stressed or being supported of or supported in. It verges on what might look on the outside as either codependence, or some would say insecurities, or mutually exploited, for lack of better words. um, vulnerabilities, as well as insecurities. Speaking to me, face to face, and removing any idea of what might be individually perceived. I don't know how someone could really say that, hey, Circus, you're being insecure, or you have this vulnerability that you're allowing to be exploited. I like to think that I don't. Not to say that I'm incapable of, or that that could not happen to me, but if someone were to come up to me and say, "Hey, you have this vulnerability. I need to tell you, Circus. I care about you. Don't let yourself, be taken advantage of this way." Chances are I'm going to say, "Oh, I know that I'm vulnerable in that way. However, I allow myself to be vulnerable that way, and I know that this is probably a way that I can be taken advantage of, but that's okay because it's my choice." Especially if I know that there's a person who is using some type of toxic behavior to exploit that particular vulnerability, but in the same way they're probably going to get it for me in another way. I can use the same types of what would traditionally be considered. Well, I guess I can't say traditional. I mean, I could have sworn this idea of being toxic or stuff like that is something I've only heard in the last, I don't know, years, but definitely not since I was young, right? Um, Either way, why not? I find that choices and freedoms, right? I can imagine it as someone's friend. You see them in a toxic relationship and you'll say, hey, this is bad for you. But what if someone is in a toxic relationship and nothing bad is happening to them? Or at least it is perceived as being toxic. Like the way that they argue, the way that they handle things one another is very kind of like tit for tat. That's not necessarily healthy, especially if someone who doesn't know what's going on, that they don't know that the two individuals involved are very strong with one another, they accept one another, they understand what's going on, but it can make people around you extremely uncomfortable. Should those two individuals be concerned about what they look like to others? In my opinion, yes. But to some degree, I think that that should be a two-way street. It's hard. I'm trying really hard right now not to go on a tirade and, how I would go about defending toxicity. And more, I guess you could say, Renaissance way, a more gothic way of looking at it. It's almost like something that is seen as a drug, you know? Are there good drugs and bad drugs? Are some people more prone to addiction than others? Because you can definitely say that there are people who are in toxic relationships and it's like an addiction to that person. And though they know that that person is bad for them, they keep going there for whatever reason. It fulfills them in a certain way due to traumas in their past or, all, no, a whole number of other stuff. But that would be another tangent that is particularly more touchy feely, to go into. What are the odds? The local frogs have started spawning, I guess. I hope you can't hear that. I'm gonna end this anyways very soon. Um, People do drugs, they stuff that's not necessarily considered, hard drugs. Uh, Weed and cigarettes and alcohol, not the same from crack, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, which they themselves are not the same as psilocybins, acids, you know, typically not concerned or considered rather as hard drugs that are like psychologically altering and will change the things in your your neurons in your brain. Yes. Maybe as I'm thinking about it, I'm probably a little bit all over the place. But the thing is, the concept of what I'm trying to stick over me to express, but it was important for me to express. At this point, I have the feeling that toxic relationships, as they look like on the outside, not necessarily what they actually are going to become a more common thing. Some things I've been seeing lately in terms of how individuals interact with each other are going towards things that they're okay using all types of tricks, lies, this like, and they're just say, oh, that's part of the fun. That's just part of the game. Like it's okay if so and so lied to me. I would have probably lied to them too, and they're mutually okay with that. Like it's okay if this person sleeps around and I sleep around. We never exclusively said to each other that we're okay with that, but it's we kind of have a silent agreement, and there's no telling if they would or they wouldn't. And that's becoming more and more common. Are we gonna accept it or are we not? I am, if you can't tell. I'm gonna say for certain people, it's going to be good. Specifically, the way that I wanna showcase or end this, I'm supposing at the end it's not, you know, completely in defense of toxicity, and a lot more a defense. Well, I'm not gonna say a lot more. It is definitely a defense of toxicity, but it's a defense of toxicity in the sense that people who use it, who can, and it benefits them, should not be judged or looked on as like you shouldn't do that. You you're making it, or you're romanticizing it into something that it's not, when you had so many people try to fight against it for so long. You're going the opposite way. You're doing a lot more damage than good. Well, I mean, perhaps I'm being selfish. That's not my problem. And getting a little bit more personal, as I don't mind to do such a thing, for those of us, not necessarily myself, but kinda, who thrive on certain things, who've been in relationships both romantically as well as with friends, who function very well and do in that type of situation. Like, are we to be dismissed just because we're like hard to be around or whatever? Especially if it's just me and that person, or me and a group of people behaving that way in our private lives, then you end up on some YouTube video, or you have a conversation with friends that you're not as used to, or who are not used to you, I guess, and they say, hey, you know this type of behavior is toxic, or you shouldn't do this type of behavior because the world says that that's wrong. And then you change yourself being convinced that it is wrong, and you end up ruining a long-term relationship that has been there for years in mutual support over some type of new moral idea that you somehow fell into. If anybody, or I'm sure there might be just the one or two of you, fall on this video, I appreciate that you would bear with me. And I might actually touch on this subject again as I think about it and process it a little bit more. This is a new idea that I plan to, I guess, grow and coddle. Take care of yourselves out there, whoever or whatever you are.